It has been a while. Um, Obviously, the stream's forgotten everything that has happened since last time. So I still need to update the scene or whatever it's called, so you can actually see the text that I'm reading. Won't that be nice? Yeah, basically every single time my computer falls asleep or anything like that, it forget or restarts or whatever. It forgets um, what the settings were. There we go. There we go. We have a text. Hope everyone's doing great. That looks really small on my screen, but hopefully you can read it. It has been over a week since I've streamed. I looked it up. It's crazy. But we are back. We're ready to read some more. I've missed it. I've been really excited about my own work recently, my own writing. Just like other stories are just like not as exciting to me. So that's partially why I haven't been streaming. There are lots of reasons, lots of excuses, but that's the one I'm telling you guys. So, what's happened? It's been so long. We have been following Sherlock Holmes. We've been reading Sherlock Holmes for a couple months now. There was a murder of a man named John Douglas. It was inside of his own home, which has a moat and a drawbridge. They bring up the bridge every night, but he was killed after the bridge came up. So that means the murderer had to have been inside the home already. That said, it's open. It's down during the day. The house is accessible during the day. Not that surprising that someone could have come in during the day and just hid in the house somewhere. Very different times than today. But what is getting to be more curious is that the wife, who seemed to be so passionate and so emotionally touched. Hello. Well, if you're here today, then I need to put the banner up today, don't I? Yeah, so anyway, the happy belated birthday. The the owner of the house, John Douglas, is murdered inside of his house with the drawbridge up late at night. Who came in during the day? It's still a mystery, but why is the wife, who looks so passionate, who looks so caring and so concerned and so distraught about her husband's death, why is she laughing and flirting with this other guy, Barker? Um, and then later, it seems they have a confrontation, and it seems like she doesn't care at all. Um, that is the current situation. It's like we have some like technical difficulties with the murder. Where was he hiding? How did he get into the house? There was a footprint on a windowsill, almost indicating that the the criminal like escaped um, through the window. But then it turns out that the footprint matches like the slipper of Barker. So that's a little sus. Like, why did he put the footprint there if if it wasn't a decoy. No one else in the house had actually heard the gunshot. The Douglas died via shotgun. There are a lot of things that are kind of a little mysterious. This guy named Hargrave had a bike abandoned by the road, and his description almost matches exactly Douglas's description, the man who was murdered. So, like, why is he being introduced? Yeah, the only two people in the house who have actually heard the murder were the two people who seem to be the least sad about the death. So maybe the murder actually happened earlier. Yeah. It's hard to pick this back up after over a week of reading. So hopefully I gave enough of a summary for the next few chapters to make sense today, but we'll find out. Okay. Chapter 7, the solution. Or maybe the story is actually over at halfway through the book. And maybe there's another mystery after this. Who knows? Next morning, after breakfast, we found Inspector MacDonald and White Mason seated in close consultation in the small parlor of the local police sergeant. On the table in front of them were piled a number of letters and telegrams, which they were carefully sorting and docketing. 3 had been placed on one side. Still on the track of the elusive bicyclist? Holmes asked cheerfully, "What is the latest news of the ruffian?" MacDonald pointed ruefully to the heap of correspondence. "He is at present reported from Leicester, Nottingham, Southampton, Derby, East Ham, Richmond, and 14 other places. And 3 of them, East Ham, Leicester, and Liverpool, there is a clear case against him. Fun fact, all 3 of these places have a soccer team in the Premier League in England." And he has actually been arrested. The country seems to be full of fugitives with yellow coats. "Dear me," said Holmes sympathetically. "Now, Mr. Mac and you, Mr. White Mason, I wish to give you a very earnest piece of advice. When I went into this case with you, I bargained, as you will no doubt remember, that I should not present you with half-proved theories, but that I should retain and work out my own ideas until I had satisfied myself that they were correct. For this reason, I am not at the present moment telling you all that is in my mind. On the other hand, I said that I would play the game fairly by you, and I do not think it is a fair game to allow you for one unnecessary moment to waste your energies upon a profitless task. Therefore, I am here to advise you this morning, and my advice to you is summed up in 3 words. Abandon the case." Whoa. This is a benefit of having this is the primary reason why a lot of detective novels are not from the point of view of the detective. Or if they are, the stories that they're about are not about the actual mysteries that are being solved. If you're in the point of view of the detective, a paragraph like this makes no sense to write. It is not a paragraph that will intrigue the reader because the reader already knows why he's saying these things. Because the reader is in the detective's head. So we build suspense in this third person or this alternate point of view because we don't know why on earth Holmes is saying to abandon the case. Is it that he already solved it? Is it that he thinks that people are in danger if we solve the case? Does he think it's actually hopeless? Like that is the mystery. That is the suspense that we actually get to build because we're not in Holmes's head right now. MacDonald and White Mason stared in amazement at their celebrated colleague. "You consider it hopeless," cried the inspector. "I consider your case to be hopeless. I do not consider that it is hopeless to arrive at the truth." "But the cyclist, he is not an invention. We have his description, his valise, his bicycle. The fellow must be somewhere. Why should we not get him?" Yes, no doubt that he is somewhere, and no doubt we shall get him. but I would not have you waste your energies in East Ham or Liverpool. I am sure that we can find some shorter cut to a result. You are holding something back. It's hardly fair of you, Mr. Holmes. The inspector was annoyed. You know my methods of work, Mr. Mack, but I will hold it back for the shortest time possible. I only wish to verify my details in one way, which can very readily be done, and then I make my bow and return to London, leaving my results entirely at your service. I owe you too much to act otherwise, for in all my experience I cannot recall any more singular and interesting study. This is clean beyond me, Mr. Holmes. We saw you when we returned from Tunbridge Wells last night, and you were in general agreement with our results. What has happened since, then, to give you a completely new idea of the case? Well, since you ask me, I spent, as I told you that I would, some hours last night at the Manor House. Oh, yes, at the very end, he's like, okay, I'm going to stay here overnight at the place with the drawbridge, and I'm going to have an umbrella inside. That's the story. He's just like, no, I don't want anything. I just want darkness and an umbrella. Well, what happened? Oh, another thing that I learned, almost either yesterday or even today, is that one way to make stories feel like you can't put them down. Of course, I'm only reading 2 chapters at a time, so a regular reader, to prevent them from putting the book down, is to always have multiple stories or openings or like mysteries going on, something that needs to be solved or something exciting or a plot point, an open plot point going on. So, for example, we have so many going on here, but I'll just name a few. Like, we don't know what's happening with the wife. Why is she laughing at a time right after her husband died? We have like the little things, like why does Holmes want an umbrella? Like, I'll just stop there because there's lots. But even if one of them isn't exciting to the reader, as long as you have multiple open, you're going to get more and more readers like caring about the umbrella, caring about the wife. Maybe they've already figured out what the wife is about, right? Oh, she did it. I don't need to think about this anymore. But then like maybe he's like, but the umbrella doesn't line up into my story. Sorry, to give you context. So he wants an umbrella. So maybe the umbrella doesn't match up with that reader's story, right? The reader thinks, okay, I know that the wife is the murderer. So if that isn't the whole story, or that if that is the whole story, if that's the only plot point that's open, if that's the only mystery going on, the reader's going to be like, well, I don't really need to read this because I know the wife's the murderer. But when we introduce this umbrella, or if we introduce the fact that we have Moriarty involved and this other accomplice from way back in the story, we've never actually resolved how those folks are involved in this whole story. Maybe one of these things is intriguing to that reader. And maybe someone doesn't care about the umbrella, or maybe they're like, oh, Moriarty's like, we figured him out in the last book, so like we don't need to worry about him now. They don't care about Moriarty, but they do care about this current case. They do care about this murder. They care about this Barker guy who just like hangs out and looks all suspicious. So we have all these different open-ended questions. So yeah, there are lots of things to be excited about. And the more things you have to be excited about in your book, the more likely it is that people will keep reading it. That makes sense. All right. So what happened during the hours last night? The late hours last night? I can only give you a very general answer to that for the moment. By the way, I have been reading a short book. Yeah, I imagine almost every media does that. Maybe video games. Maybe Mario doesn't do that too much. But you do have the challenge of how do I eventually catch up with Bowser and how do I jump over this Goomba? You are thinking about both of those things at once. Yeah. Yeah, but TV definitely does it. Yeah. By the way, I've been reading a short but clear and interesting account of the old building, purchasable at the modest sum of 1 penny from the local tobacconist. Here Holmes drew a small tract embellished with a rude engraving of the ancient manor house from his waistcoat pocket. It immensely... That's fair. That's fair, yeah. If you are making the decisions, you have to be already engaged, right? You don't need to have multiple decisions or multiple problems at once in a game. Yeah, exactly. I cannot get enough milk. Milk is so good. Uh, it immensely adds to the zest of an investigation, my dear Mr. Mack, when one is in conscious sympathy with the historical atmosphere of one's surroundings. Don't look so impatient, for I assure you that even so bald an account as this raises some sort of picture of the past in one's mind. Permit me to give you a sample. Erected in the 5th year of the reign of James I, I stand upon the site of a much older building. That manor house of Burlstone presents one of the finest surviving examples of the moated Jacobean residence. You're making fools of us, Mr. Holmes. Yeah, two very, yeah. Whew, so, yeah. um, I just want to make this point of like, here's Holmes. We've already been intrigued by Holmes. Holmes has set the seed in our head about the umbrella, about wanting to stay overnight. And now he's talking about the ancient history of it. And so while we are slightly engaged, it's like, man, I wish you would just tell us what's happening. So he's drawing us out. We understand, like, he's teasing us, he's toying with us a little bit. And so, like, we are already naturally, like, on edge. We kind of want to get to the end of this. And then someone actually just comes in and says exactly what we're saying. Like, hey, we don't care. If there's, like, a hidden latch in the drawbridge or something, just tell us. That's the... This is how you make dialogue interesting. Instead of just one continuous monologue. Imagine if this whole thing was just a monologue about the whole story. It's like, okay, you solved it. Congratulations. There wasn't any dynamicism, any dynamic intrigue to the conversation. But here we are getting interrupted. We're like, come on, Holmes. Just tell us what's going on. We don't want 300 years of history. Just tell us now. Tut tut, Mr. Mack. The first sign of temper I've detected in you. Well, I won't read it verbatim, since you feel so strongly upon the subject. But when I tell you that there is some account of the taking of the place by a parliamentary colonel in 1644, of the concealment of Charles for several days in the course of the Civil War, and finally of a visit there by the second George, you will admit that there are various associations of interest connected with this ancient house. Does England consider the American Revolutionary War a civil war? Or is this some other war that I don't know about in England's history? Anyway. I don't doubt it, Mr. Holmes, but that is no business of ours. Is it not? Is it not? Breadth of view, my dear Mr. Mack, is one of the essentials of our profession. The interplay of ideas and the oblique uses of knowledge are often of extraordinary interest. You'll excuse these remarks from one who, though a mere connoisseur of crime, is still rather older and perhaps more experienced than yourself. I'm the first to admit that, said the detective heartily. You get to the point, I admit. But you have such a deuced, round-of-the-corner way of doing it. Yeah, it's a... yeah, I don't know history well enough. It's something I am notoriously bad at remembering. Well, I'll drop past history and get down to present-day facts. I called last night, as I've already said, at the manor house. I did not see either Barker or Mrs. Douglas. I saw no necessity to disturb them, but I was pleased to hear that the lady was not visibly pining, and that she had partaken of an excellent dinner. My visit was specially made to the good Mr. Ames, with whom I exchanged some amiabilities, which culminated in his allowing me, without reference to anyone else, to sit alone for a time in the study. What? With that? I ejaculated. Oh, yeah. I think the sun still has not set on the British Empire. I think that's a fact that still goes on because they own like some random island in the Indian Ocean, something like that. So there's still a point in the British Empire that has been in sunlight for the last 400 years. Um, I think that might have changed, obviously, but the, the this might have been less funny back when this was written, but this is definitely a word that people never use anymore in writing, or at least not for the use of saying the word said. With what? With what I said. Um, no, no, everything is now in order. You gave permission for that, Mr. Mack, as I am informed. The room was in its normal state, and in it I passed an instructive quarter of an hour. What were you doing? Well, not to make a mystery of so simple a matter, I was looking for the missing dumbbell. It has always bulked rather large in my estimate of the case. I ended by finding it. Oh, yes, the infamous dumbbell, which keeps coming back and no one ever cares, and I keep forgetting about it. But yes, the dumbbell. Where? Ah, there we come to the edge of the unexplored. Let me go a little further, a very little further, and I will promise that you shall share everything I know. Well, we're bound to take you on your own terms, said the inspector, but when it comes to telling us to abandon the case, why in the name of goodness should we abandon the case? For the simple reason, my dear Mr. Mack, that you have not got the first idea what it is that you are investigating. We are investigating the murder of Mr. John Douglas of Burlstone Manor. Yes, yes, so you are. But don't trouble to trace the mysterious gentleman upon the bicycle. I assure you that it won't help you. Then what do you suggest that we do? I will tell you exactly what to do if you will do it. Well, I'm bound to say I've always found you had reason behind all your queer ways. I'll do what you advise. And you, Mr. White Mason? The country detective looked helplessly from one to the other. Holmes and his methods were new to him. Well, if it is good enough for the inspector, it is good enough for me, he said at last. Capital, said Holmes. Well, then, I should recommend a nice, cheery country walk for both of you. They tell me that the views from Burlstone Ridge over the Weald are very remarkable. No doubt lunch could be got at some suitable hostelry, though my ignorance of the country prevents me from recommending one. In the evening, tired but happy. Man, this is getting past a joke, cried MacDonald, raising angrily from his chair. Well, well, spend the day as you like, said Holmes, patting him cheerfully upon the shoulder. Do what you like and go where you will, but meet me here before dusk without fail. Without fail, Mr. Mack. That sounds more like sanity. All of it was excellent advice, but I don't insist, so long as you are here when I need you. But now, before we part, I want you to write a note to Mr. Barker. Well, I'll dictate it if you like. Ready? Dear sir, it has struck me that it is our duty to drain the moat in the hope that we may find some. It's impossible, said the inspector. I've made inquiry. Tut tut, my dear sir, please do what I ask you. Well, go on. That we may find some in the hope that we may find something which may bear upon our investigation. I have made arrangements, and the workmen will be at work early tomorrow morning diverting the stream. Impossible. Diverting the stream, so I thought it best to explain matters beforehand. Now sign that and send it by hand about 4 o'clock. At that hour we shall meet again in this room. Until then we may each do what we like, for I can assure you that this inquiry has come to a definite pause. Evening was drawing in when we reassembled. Holmes was very serious in his manner, very curious, and the detectives obviously critical and annoyed. Well, gentlemen, said my friend gravely, I am asking you now to put everything to the test with me, and you will judge for yourselves whether the observations I have made justify the conclusions to which I have come. It is a chill evening, and I do not know how long our expedition may last, so I beg that you will wear your warmest coats. It is of the first importance that we should be in our places before it grows dark, so with your permission we shall get started at once. Something that happened in that dialogue that we just had is that we had resistance, right? We had a more characterful, more flavorful way of setting what sounds like a trap to me, to Mr. Barker. We are deliberately lying to one of the characters of the story, right? Assuming the inspector is telling the truth, which we have no reason to believe that he wouldn't. We can't drain the moat, but we're telling one of the people who we suspect the most that we are draining the moat. So that's another like idea that's in our heads, right? Like, okay, we're going through this dialogue and we're learning of a lie and we're trying to figure out what's going on. We're stuck. We're hooked on this dialogue, right? We could have very easily just said, go get Mr. Barker. That's like not a very interesting paragraph. We don't even find that interesting. Like there's no way we read that paragraph and be like, oh yes, very interesting. Go get Mr. Barker. It's like maybe like, well, now Holmes suspects Mr. Barker, but now here we're lying deliberately to one of the characters. That's an engaging dialogue. That's a dialogue that worked really well for me, at least. I definitely was more engaged with this dialogue than the dialogue we had earlier, where they're talking about history or whatever, which I actually stopped paying attention about. Well, gentlemen, said my friend gravely. The detectives are obviously critical and annoyed. I am asking you now to put everything to the test with me, and you will judge for yourselves, blah, blah, blah. It's a chill evening. Warmest coast is of first importance that we should be in our place before it grows dark. We passed along the outer bounds of the Manor House Park until we came to a place where there was a gap in the rails which fenced it. Through this we slipped, and then in the gathering gloom we followed Holmes until we had reached a shrubbery which lies nearly opposite to the main door and the drawbridge. The latter had not been raised. Holmes crouched down behind the screen of laurels, and we all three followed his example. Well, what do we do now? Asked MacDonald with some gruffness. Possess our souls in patience and make as little noise as possible, Holmes answered. What are we here for at all? I really think that you might treat us with some frankness. With more frankness. Holmes laughed. Watson insists that I am the dramatist in real life, said he. Some touch of the artist wells up within me and calls insistently for a well-staged performance. Surely our profession, Mr. Mac, would be a drab and sordid one if we did not sometimes set the scene so as to glorify our results. The blunt accusation, the brutal tap upon the shoulder, what can one make of such a denouement? But the quick inference, the subtle trap, the clever forecast of coming events, the triumphant vindication of bold theories, are these not the pride and the justification of our life's work? At the present moment you will thrill with the glamour of the situation and the anticipation of the hunt. Where would be that thrill if I had been as definite as a timetable? I only ask a little patience, Mr. Mac, and all will be clear to you. Well, I hope the pride and justification and the rest of it will come before we all get our death of cold, said the London detective with comic resignation. We all had good reason to join in the aspiration, for our vigil was a long and bitter one. Slowly the shadows darkened over the long, somber face of the old house. A cold, damp reek from the moat chilled us to the bones and set our teeth chattering. There was a single lamp over the gateway and a steady globe of light in the fatal study. Everything else was dark and still. I found this paragraph more engaging and exciting than other description paragraphs we've had before. And I'm just trying to think about why. One, it was written in such a way that it was easier to read, right? It wasn't in old-timey English. We've definitely had like 500 word sentences before. And these were fairly short, which does play to the pace that we're currently reading that I'm now butchering by analyzing it. But the tension is high, right? We're out in the cold. Only Holmes really knows what's going on. We just learned we're sort of in a plot of trickery because we're lying to people. We're hiding facts from people. So it's kind of like we're kind of tense, right? We don't want these long meandering sentences. We have these very short, like choppy ideas, right? A cold, damp reek from the moat chilled us to the bones, set our teeth chattering. These are short ideas. This is technically one sentence, but this is a concept that's very short. Chilled us to the bones is a concept. Set our teeth chattering is a concept. Like, I don't know what I'm trying to say, but I think this is why this paragraph is more engaging than other paragraphs we've read before that are just pure details, pure setting. We call it a fatal study to continue darkening the mood. We see a single lamp. Everything else was dark and still. That definitely adds the dramatic tension, right? We're paying attention to the points of the scene that set the mood, right? We're not examining the wood of the drawbridge or the feathers of the guy's coat, right? We're only paying attention to these things. We do have different senses at play here also, right? We have a lot of darkness imagery, right? We have long shadows, we have the dark and still, we have the single lamp that's a steady globe of light, but we also have the tactile or the heat sensory of being chilled. We have the pressure and the sensation of coldness when our teeth are chattering. We have the word bitter, although that's probably not used in the sense of the taste buds sort of way. And we have the emotional feeling of the house, which is somber. We have dampness. We have the reek, which is generally a smell. Like we packed a lot into this paragraph, I think. Maybe, I don't know. Okay. Moving on. How long is this to last? Asked the inspector finally. And what is it we are watching for? I have no more notion than you how long it is to last, Holmes answered with some asperity. If criminals would always schedule their movements like railway trains, it would certainly be more convenient for all of us. As to what it is well, that's what we're looking for. As he spoke, the bright yellow light in the study was obscured by someone passing to and fro before it. The laurels among which we lay were immediately opposite the window and not more than 100 feet from it. Presently it was thrown open with the winding of hinges, and we could dimly see the dark outline of a man's head and shoulders looking out into the gloom. For some minutes he peered forth in furtive, stealthy fashion, as one who wishes to be assured that he is unobserved. Then he leaned forward, and in the intense silence we were aware of the soft lapping of agitated water. He seemed to be stirring up the moat with something that he held in his hand. Then suddenly he hauled something in as a fisherman lands a fish, some large, round object which obscured the light as it was dragged through the open casement. Now, cried Holmes, now. We were all upon our feet, staggering after him with our stiffened limbs, while he ran swiftly across the bridge and rang violently at the bell. There was the rasping of bolts from either side, and the amazed Ames stood in the entrance. Holmes brushed him aside without a word, and, followed by all of us, rushed into the room which had been occupied by the man whom we had been watching. The old oil lamp on the table represented the glow which we had seen from outside. It was now in the hand of Cecil Barker, who held it towards us as we entered. Its light shone upon his strong, resolute, clean-shaven face and his menacing eyes. "What the devil is the meaning of all this?" he cried. "What are you after, anyhow?" Holmes took a swift glance round, then pounced upon a sodden bundle tied together with a cord, which lay where it had been thrust under the writing table. "That is what we are after, Mr. Barker. This bundle, weighted with a dumbbell, which you have just raised from the bottom of the moat." Barker stared at Holmes with amazement in his face. "How in thunder came you to know anything about it?" he asked. "Simply that I put it there." "You put it there? You?" "Perhaps I should have said replaced it there," said Holmes. "You will remember, Inspector MacDonald, that I was somewhat struck by the absence of the dumbbell. I drew your attention to it, but with the pressure of other events, you had hardly the time to give it the consideration which would have enabled you to draw deductions from it. When water is near and a weight is missing, it is not very far-fetched supposition that something has been sunk in the water. The idea was at least worth testing, so with the help of Ames, who admitted me to the room, and the crook of Dr. Watson's umbrella, I was able last night to fish up and inspect this bundle." "Oh, he didn't want an umbrella. He wanted something with a hook at the end. A stick with a hook." It was of the first importance, however, that we should be able to prove who placed it there. This we accomplished by the very obvious device of announcing that the moat would be dried tomorrow, which had, of course, the effect of whoever had hidden the bundle would most certainly withdraw it at the moment that darkness enabled him to do so. We have no less than 4 witnesses as to who it was who took advantage of the opportunity. And so, Mr. Barker, I think the word lies now with you. Sherlock Holmes put the sopping bundle upon the table beside the lamp and undid the cord which bound it. From within he extracted a dumbbell, which he tossed down to its fellow in the corner. Then he drew forth a pair of boots. "American, as you perceive," he remarked, pointing to the toes. Then he laid upon the table a long, deadly, sheathed knife. Finally he unraveled a bundle of clothing, comprising a complete set of underclothes, socks, a gray tweed suit, and a short yellow overcoat. Dun dun dun. "The clothes are commonplace," remarked Holmes, "save only the overcoat, which is full of suggestive touches." He held it tenderly towards the light. "Here, as you perceive, is the inner pocket prolonged into the lining in such fashion as to give ample space for the truncated fowling piece," meaning the shotgun, "that they sawed off. The tailor's tab is on the neck. Neal, Outfitter, Vermissa, USA. I have spent an instructive afternoon in the rector's library and have enlarged my knowledge by adding the fact that Vermissa is a flourishing little town at the head of one of the best-known coal and iron valleys in the United States." "You're losing me, author. I have some recollection, Mr. Barker, that you associate the coal districts with Mr. Douglas's first wife, and it would surely not be too far-fetched an inference that the VV upon the card by the dead body might stand for Vermissa Valley, and that this very valley," another VV, very clever, "this very valley which sends forth emissaries of murder may be that valley of fear of which we have heard. So much is fairly clear. And now, Mr. Barker, I am to be standing rather in the way of your explanation." It was a sight to see Cecil Barker's expressive face during the exposition of the great detective. Anger, amazement, consternation, and indecision swept over it in turn. Finally, he took refuge in a somewhat acrid irony. "You know such a lot, Mr. Holmes. Perhaps you had better tell us some more," he sneered. "I have no doubt that I could tell you a great deal more, Mr. Barker, but it would come with a better grace from you." "Oh, you think so, do you? Well, all I can say is that if there's any secret here, it is not my secret, and I am not the man to give it away." "Well, if you take that line, Mr. Barker," said the inspector quietly, "we might just keep you in sight until we have the warrant and can hold you." "You can do what you damn please about that," said Barker defiantly. The proceedings seemed to have come to a definite end, so far as he was concerned, for one had only to look at that granite face to realize that no peine forte de, I have no idea, would ever force him to plead against his will. The deadlock was broken, however, by a woman's voice. Mrs. Douglas had been standing listening at the half-open door, and now she entered the room. "You've done enough for now, Cecil," said she. "Whatever comes of it in the future, you have done enough." "Enough and more than enough," remarked Sherlock Holmes gravely. "I have every sympathy with you, madam, and should strongly urge you to have some confidence in the common sense of our jurisdiction, and to take the police voluntarily into your complete confidence. It may be that I am myself at fault for not following up the hint which you conveyed to me through my friend Dr. Watson, but at that time I had every reason to believe that you were directly concerned in the crime. Now I am assured that this is not so. At the same time, there is much that is unexplained, and I should strongly recommend that you ask Mr. Douglas to tell us his own story." "Mr. Douglas, he's the dead one." So, the fact that Mr. Douglas and the missing Hargrave, the bike owner, had similar character descriptions, right? Douglas and Hargrave were both described as elderly and gray-haired and slightly bulky. The fact that the murdered person's head was blown off mostly made him unrecognizable, except for maybe a few key hairs or something like that. These things to me point to Hargrave being killed and not Douglas. But let's find out. And also there's this yellow coat that was found, which also helps. Mrs. Douglas gave a cry of astonishment at Holmes's words. The detectives and I must have echoed it when we were aware of a man who seemed to have emerged from the wall, who advanced now from the gloom of the corner in which he had appeared. Mrs. Douglas turned, and in an instant her arms were around him. Barker had seized his outstretched hand. "It's best this way, Jack," his wife repeated. "I am sure that it is best." "Indeed, yes, Mr. Douglas," said Sherlock Holmes. "I am sure you will find it best." They did not explicitly say it was Mr. Douglas, except for this. "Yes, indeed, Mr. Douglas." Okay. All right, so yeah, Mr. Douglas was hiding in the corner, I guess. The man stood blinking at us with the dazed look of one who comes from the dark into the light. It was a remarkable face. Bold gray eyes, a strong, short-clipped, grizzled mustache, a square, projecting chin, and a humorous mouth. He took a good look at us all, and then, to my amazement, he advanced to me and handed me a bundle of paper. "Oh, no. I've heard of you," said he in a voice which was not quite English and not quite American, but was altogether mellow and pleasing. "You are a historian of this bunch. Well, Dr. Watson, you've never had such a story as that passed through your hands before, and I'll lay my last dollar on that. Tell it your own way, but there are facts, and you can't miss the public so long as you have those. I've been cooped up 2 days, and I've spent the daylight hours, as much daylight as I could get in that rat trap, in putting the thing into words. You're welcome to them, you and your public. There's the story of the Valley of Fear." "That's the past, Mr. Douglas," said Sherlock Holmes quietly. "What we desire now to hear is your story of the present." "You'll have it, sir," said Douglas. "May I smoke as I talk?" "Well, thank you, Mr. Holmes. You're a smoker yourself, if I remember right. And you'll guess what it is to be sitting for 2 days with tobacco in your pocket and afraid that the smell will give you away." He leaned against the mantelpiece and sucked at the cigar which Holmes had handed him. "I've heard of you, Mr. Holmes. I never guessed that I should meet you. But before you are through with that," he nodded at my papers, "you will say I've brought something fresh." Inspector MacDonald had been staring at the newcomer with the greatest amazement. "Well, this fairly beats me," he cried at last. "If you are Mr. John Douglas of Burlstone Manor, then whose death have we been investigating for 2 days? And where in the world have you sprung from now? You seem to have come out of the floor like a jack-in-the-box." Sometimes you just gotta have a really stupid character. just to make things a little more entertaining, a little more comical. And someone's just like that half or even that full step behind of him not understanding the situation. Man, we've been looking for this guy in a yellow overcoat, and we just found a yellow overcoat and a dead guy matching his description. Where did he go? Ah, Mr. Max, said Holmes, shaking a reproving forefinger. You would not read that excellent local compilation which described the concealment of King Charles. People did not hide in those days without excellent hiding places, and the hiding place that has once been used may be again. I had persuaded myself that we should find Mr. Douglas under this roof. And how long have you been playing this trick upon us, Mr. Holmes? Said the inspector angrily. How long have you allowed us to waste ourselves upon a search that you knew to be an absurd one? Not one instant, my dear Mr. Mac. Only last night did I form my views of the case. As they could not be put to the proof until this evening, I invited you and your colleague to take a holiday for the day. Pray, what more could I do? When I found the suit of clothes in the moat, it at once became apparent to me that the body we had found could not have been the body of Mr. John Douglas at all, but must be that of the bicyclist from Tunbridge Wells. No other conclusion was possible. Therefore, I had to determine where Mr. John Douglas himself could be, and the balance of probability was that with the connivance of his wife and his friend, he was concealed in a house which had such conveniences for a fugitive, and awaiting quieter times when he could make his final escape. Well, you figured it out about right, said Douglas approvingly. I thought I'd dodge your British law, for I was not sure how I stood under it, and also I saw my chance to throw these hounds once for all off my track. Mind you, from first to last, I have done nothing to be ashamed of, and nothing that I would not do again. But you'll judge that for yourselves when I tell you my story. Never mind warning me, Inspector. I am ready to stand pat upon the truth. Also, apparently, cops in the United States, at least some states, don't have to read you your rights anymore. And that certain phrases don't actually, get you your lawyer. You have to say, a specific phrase now for your lawyer to show up. It's ridiculous. I'm not going to begin at the beginning. That's all there. He indicated my bundle of papers. And a mighty queer yarn you'll find it. It all comes down to this, that there are some men that have good cause to hate me and would give their last dollar to know that they had got me. So long as I am alive and they are alive, there is no safety in this world for me. They hunted me from Chicago to California, and then they chased me out of America. But when I married and settled down in this quiet spot, I thought my last years were going to be peaceable. I never explained to my wife how things were. Why should I pull her into it? She would never have a quiet moment again, but would always be imagining trouble. I fancy she knew something, for I may have dropped a word here or a word there, but until yesterday, after you gentlemen had seen her, she never knew the rights of the matter. She told you all she knew, and so did Barker here, for on the night when this thing happened, there was mighty little time for explanations. She knows nothing now, or she knows everything now, and I would have been a wiser man if I had told her sooner. But it was a hard question, dear. He took her hand for an instant in his own, and I acted for the best. Well, gentlemen, the day before these happenings, I was over in Tunbridge Wells, and I got a glimpse of a man in the street. It was only a glimpse, but I have a quick eye for these things, and I never doubted who it was. It was the worst enemy I had among them all, one who had been after me like a hungry wolf after a caribou all these years. I knew there was trouble coming, and I came home and made ready for it. I guess I'd fight through it all right on my own. I guessed I'd fight through it all right on my own. My luck was a proverb in the States about 76. I never doubted that it would be with me still. If someone can explain to me what the heck this sentence is supposed to be saying, he's lucky. He was known for his luck, and he'd fight through it on his own. Is that what that sentence means? I was on my guard all that next day and never went out into the park. It says Will, or he would have had the drop on me with that buckshot gun of his before ever I could draw on him. After the bridge was up, my mind was always more restful when that bridge was up in the evenings. I put the thing clear of my head. I never dreamed of his getting into the house and waiting for me. But when I made my round in my dressing gown, as was my habit, I had no sooner entered my study than I scented danger. I guess when a man has had dangers in his life, and I've had more than most in my time, there's this kind of sixth sense that waves the red flag. I saw the signal clear enough, and yet I couldn't tell you why. Next instant, I spotted a boot under the curtain window, and I saw why plain enough. I had just the one candle that was in my hand, and there was a good light, but there was a good light from the hall lamp through the open door. I put down the candle and jumped for the hammer that I had left on the mantel. At the same moment, he sprang at me. I saw the glint of a knife, and I lashed at him with the hammer. I got him somewhere, for the knife tinkled down on the floor. He dodged round the table as quick as an eel, and a moment later he'd got his gun from under his coat. I heard him cock it, but I had got hold of it before he could fire. I had it by the barrel, and we wrestled for it all ends up for a minute or more. I had it by the barrel, and we wrestled for it. All ends up for a minute or more. Does this mean like they're doing this sort of thing where the gun's like pointing upwards? It was death to the man that lost his grip. He never lost his grip, but he got it butt downward for a moment too long. Maybe it was I that pulled the trigger. Maybe we just jolted it off between us. Anyhow, he got both barrels in the face, and there I was staring down all that was left of Ted Baldwin. Ted Baldwin is not on this list. I recognized him in the township, and again when he sprang for me, but his own mother wouldn't recognize him as I saw him then. I'm used to rough work, but I fairly turned sick at the sight of him. I was hanging on the side of the table when Barker came hurrying down. I heard my wife coming, and I ran to the door and stopped her. It was no sight for a woman. I promised I'd come to her soon. I said a word or two to Barker. He took it all in at a glance, and we waited for the rest to come along, but there was no sign of them. Then we understood that they could hear nothing, and all that had happened was only known to ourselves. It was at that instant the idea came to me. I was fairly dazzled by the brilliance of it. The man's sleeve had slipped up, and there was a branded mark of the lodge upon his forearm. See here? The man whom we had known as Douglas turned up his own coat and cuff to show a brown triangle within a circle, exactly that which had been seen upon the dead man. It was the sight of that which started me on it. I seemed to see it all clear at a glance. There were his height and his hair and figure about the same as mine own. No one could swear to his face, poor devil. I brought him his suit of clothes, and in a quarter of an hour Barker and I had put my dressing gown on him, and he lay as you found him. We tied all his things into a bundle, and I weighted them with the only weight I could find and put them through the window. The card he had meant to lay upon my body was lying beside his own. My rings were put on his finger, but when it came to my wedding ring, he held out his muscular hand. You can see for yourselves that I had struck the limit. I have not moved it since the day I was married, and it would have taken a file to get it off. I don't know, anyhow, that I should have cared to part with it, but if I had wanted to, I couldn't. So we just had to leave that detail to take care of itself. On the other hand, I brought a bit of plaster down and put it where I am wearing one myself at this instant. You slipped up there, Mr. Holmes, clever as you are, for if you ever had chance to take off that plaster, you would have found no cut underneath it. That's kind of clever. Well, that was the situation. If I could lay If I could lie low for a while and then get away where I could be joined by my widow, we should have a chance at last for living in peace for the rest of our lives. I do find that this is kind of like that monologue I said that I wasn't too excited by, or wouldn't be excited to hear about. Like, yes, this is the story, but either through the combination of like the style of the words or the sentence structure or whatever, it's just like maybe it's just like me being a little stuttery today or something, but it was just harder to read and harder to get through and to enjoy. Like, I get it. I understand what happened, but it was just like hard to. It wasn't exciting to get through those last few paragraphs. But maybe it's different for you guys. Maybe you're reading along and it was like, oh yeah, these devils would give me no rest so long as I was above ground. But if they saw in the papers that Baldwin had got his man, there would be an end to all of my troubles. I hadn't much time to make it clear to Barker and to my wife, but they understood enough to be able to help me. I knew all about this hiding place, so did Ames, but it never entered his head to connect it with the matter. I retired into it, and it was up to Barker to do the rest. I guess you can fill in for yourselves what he did. He opened the window and made the mark on the sill to give the idea of how the murderer escaped. It was a tall order, that, but as the bridge was up, there was no other way. Then, when everything was fixed, he rang the bell for all he was worth. What happened afterward, you know. You know. And so, gentlemen, you can do what you please, but I've told you the truth and the whole truth, so help me God. What I ask you now is, how do I stand by the English law? There was a silence which was broken by Sherlock Holmes. The English law is in the main a just law. You will get no worse than your deserts from that, Mr. Douglas. But I would ask you, how did this man know that you lived here, or how to get into your house, and where to hide to get you? Blah. I know nothing of this. Holmes's face was very white and grave. The story is not yet over, I fear, said he. You may find worse dangers than the English law, or even than your enemies from America. I see trouble before you, Mr. Douglas. You'll take my advice and still be on your guard. And now, my long-suffering readers, I will ask you to come away with me for a time, far from Sussex Manor House of Burlstone, and far also from the year of grace in which we made our eventful journey, which ended with the strange story of the man who had been known as John Douglas. I wish you to journey back some 20 years in time, and westward some thousands of miles in space, that I may lay before you a singular and terrible narrative, so singular and so terrible that you may find it hard to believe that even as I tell it, even so did it occur. Do not think that I intrude one story before another is finished. As you read on, you will find that this is not so, and when I've detailed those distant events, and you have solved this mystery of the past, we shall meet once more in those rooms of Baker Street, where this, like so many other wonderful happenings, will find its end. Okay, so I think I'm done reading. That's the end of the reading section of today. But that is a reminder. This is a, hey, wait a second. There are still loose ends, right? We are not done with this. We might have solved this exact murder, but the motive, not the motive, but maybe the exactly what Holmes said, like, how did he know? How did this man know that you lived here, how to get into your house, and where to hide to get you? This goes back to the very beginning of the book, where Holmes is like scared of Professor Moriarty. He gets this note from his accomplice, or his like mole or whatever, saying like, hey, Douglas is in danger, right? That part has never been resolved. So the author is coming back saying like, don't think the story's over yet. There's still a lot to unpack here. There's still a reason why we brought up all these characters. Like what we just read could have been a story in and of itself, but we're now learning that this is just one small piece of the puzzle, one actor in the grand chess game that we're all playing. So that is good foresight by the author and a good way to remind us that like this is we've introduced a lot of characters like this Bodymaster McGinty, who is still unaccounted for. The whole of the Valley of Fear we did not really investigate, but Holmes is aware of these things. Holmes is like, this could have just been another murder, but I was alerted to it the day before. So that is curious, and we need to remember that as we move on to part 2, the Scourers. I'll read that tomorrow. We'll get started on that tomorrow at least. So, hope you enjoyed. Thanks for being here. Hopefully I'll see you tomorrow, 2:30 Pacific time. And down with Big Brother.